Eat, Slay, Love. A Black Ocean short story. Written by J.S. Morin. Narrated by Michael Naramore. Two sleek black hovers pulled up outside a palatial Martian home. They stopped just above the grass a short distance from the patio and let out a host of passengers. Awaiting them on the terrace, Tiffany balanced little Jessie on her hip as Harmony poised at the very edge of where stone met grass, bouncing with excitement. Clearly, the little girl had been told to stay off the lawn while the hovers settled.
"Mommy, Mommy!"
Harmony shouted as she launched herself forward the instant she saw a smile of permission to approach. She raced across the grass and careened into Karen's arms, throwing a hug around Esper as soon as she'd been lifted from the ground.
"We had the bestest time. We flew paper birds and made little clay people that really walked and—"
"Slow down, sweetie," Esper cooed. "Take a breath. We'll hear all about it." "Kid's got a future in used starship sales," Carl remarked as he ambled over to retrieve his own daughter. He called out to Tiffany as he approached. "How many waxy rods this one eat?" Jessie giggled, but it wasn't fucking funny. The box said they were non-toxic, but that didn't make them any less a choking hazard.
"0, unless you count licking one."
Amy, walking awkwardly in the late stages of her second pregnancy, took her time following her husband.
"She doesn't even like them, just does it for the attention."
Enzio ambled past with Yaman on his arm. She'd never gotten the impression that there was anything between them, but mixed singles going stag to the same opera just seemed off. He pointedly ignored Tiffany, though that lack of acknowledgement was a communication all its own.
"You managed to put a dinner into them?"
Esper asked as she led Harmony back to the house.
"Sure did,"
Tiffany confirmed.
"We made cookies,"
Harmony announced. Tiffany gasped.
"You little narc!"
To which the little girl giggled as she ran past out of her reach. Tiffany watched Harmony bolt into the house, smirking after her. When she turned her attention back to the adults, she composed herself.
"How is Don Giovanni?"
Carl had a ready answer like he'd rehearsed it in the hover. A lot of people screaming and yammering gibberish, but eventually Carl and Roddy settled in and appreciated some culture, Enzio cut in, no doubt prepared for this line of nonsense. Roddy stumbled out of the hover with help from Shoni.
"I told you I'd stay sober and not embarrass anyone. The entire opera. You all should have known. That was exactly how long I'd—"
"Come on, tough guy,"
Shoni teased.
"That's enough words for one night. Let's get you to bed."
Tiffany tried not to be offended that they'd chosen to kennel their kids rather than leave them in her care, but the Fabian Cultural Center offered overnight services that Tiffany didn't plan to stick around to match. A third hover, with a slightly more dated silhouette, swooped in behind Esper's two. Her drivers lifted off, leaving just the newcomer, which slid into the primary position behind the house.
"Sure you can't stay the night?"
Esper asked.
"I feel bad having you watch the kids and not even share drinks after."
By most societal standards, Tiffany was too young to accept an offer of drinks. But neither of them respected society's rules on a wide array of subjects more serious than booze.
"Look, I swore your kids would safely grow up to make you grandparents. I did my bit. Everyone's alive and filled with cookies. But I've got a new job, and it's going to involve a lot less of both."
Esper's cheery "just saw my kid is safe" glow faded.
"You can still change your mind. The galaxy is yours to explore. You could pay me a lot of money to do next to nothing, or I could just go rogue and do whatever the fuck I wanted. Yeah, I've had a conversation or two. You, Karen, Enzio, Tanny tried to hire me. Kubu asked me to come live on Polted. But I've got an opportunity to do some real good in the galaxy in a profession most people can't hack. You're too young to go down this path."
Tiffany moved in for a hug rather than argue the point.
"I'll check in soon."
"Be safe." Tiffany hid a smirk. If Esper meant that, she really didn't understand Tiffany's new job. The hover was owned by the convocation and operated by the liaison's office. The pilot was a non-magical convocation employee, but Tiffany hadn't been counting on there being a liaison in the rear seat with her.
Thought this was a quickie interplanetary shuttle. I was planning on a nap.
The grim-faced liaison didn't look like he was good for much more if that had been her intention.
Your formal orientation at the library can wait. They have a job for you.
He handed Tiffany a manila envelope. The only thing written on the outside was "Do Not Open" in giant capital letters, accompanied by a series of runes she couldn't read. The latter glowed faintly if she held the envelope at the proper angle.
I already had my stuff shipped to Earth.
Your belongings will be well looked after, the liaison assured her. There will be a selection of appropriate clothing aboard the transport.
Tiffany spread her hands.
Give me a system name. I'll fly my own way. It's smooth.
Nothing seemed to be able to stop the narrative momentum of this anthropomorphic wet blanket, however.
If you require other provisions, you may obtain them either from the liaison aboard the transport or via convocation credit once you reach your destination.
About that convocation credit, do I have, a budget?
No.
Smooth.
You don't seem to be treating this matter with due gravity.
Tiffany leaned back and stretched, as much to help stay awake through this conversation as anything.
Look, friend, I can't possibly imagine they didn't at least hint at what they're hiring me for. This little secret package you handed me is the instruction manual on reversing someone's aliveness. And I'm going to do it. Why? Because I can. And because I've got a certain je ne donne pas a fuck. So excuse me if I don't get all arcano-patriotic and reverent and shit over this graveyard house hunter.
She backhanded the envelope for emphasis. Her contact stiffened.
There is a certain decorum to be maintained.
Decorum? To impress who? You? The pilot? No offense, she called out.
None taken, ma'am,
the pilot replied without turning to look back. He kept them on whatever course they were taking, rocketing through Martian airspace and blowing through traffic with what looked like blatant disregard for aerial control laws.
Look, buddy, if you were important, you wouldn't be handing out paperwork. And don't give me that indignant look. Hey, you want a piece of career advice?
She could tell by his one arched eyebrow that he neither wanted advice nor planned to prevent her giving it.
Quit treating people like they're better than you. I got this job talking just like this to the guy who's my boss now.
Not all of us are privileged to do likewise.
Tiffany watched as they reached the outskirts of civilization, which was a neat trick on Mars. When they landed at a quiet private starport at the edge of a planetary wilderness park, Tiffany didn't even know which one, she hopped out and headed for the convocation transport's waiting boarding ramp. Then she looked back.
Hey, if I have any pull ordering you two around, go get laid.
The pilot grinned.
I'm happily married,
the liaison replied acidly. Tiffany backed her way up the ramp, rolling her eyes.
Then it should be easy.
When the boarding ramp closed behind her, Tiffany headed straight for the bunk. Well, it was more of a bed and breakfast being held in captivity aboard a tiny starship, but she was tired past the point of granting the place its due appreciation.
I'm getting some shut-eye,
she announced to the liaison crew.
I've been wrangling preschoolers all night and have to be up early for a murder. Don't wake me for anything short of demonic possession.
They didn't wake her. The transport dropped Tiffany off on Caspian Beta. Mid-core, not much to look at, but she'd just come from Mars, so maybe her aesthetic sense hadn't recalibrated to the galactic norm yet. Trying to be generous, the starport had an Art Deco flair, and the name markers on the city streets were hovering neon. When the rain caught the reflection off the seedy hotel signs and cyber mod parlor, it could almost be considered... No, She couldn't credit Caspian Beta as anything more than a shithole of crass modern embellishments without the historical charm to get away with it. Rather than hailing a cab, Tiffany trudged off into the planet-side night to find lodgings. Not that she hadn't gotten enough sleep on the transport. She just needed a base of operations. Standing there in the starport or out in a rainstorm of questionable chemical content wasn't the place for opening the convocation package describing her mission. The Pyongyang Hotel didn't put much of a dent in the little pile of hard coin they'd handed Tiffany before she disembarked the shuttle. Nor did it ask for ID, offer to carry her luggage, or make any conversation beyond room 4C. On the plastic laminate kitchenette countertop of room 4C, Tiffany scratched a fingernail through the convocation's runes to break the seal. She shook out a sparse dossier of handwritten notes on parchment and a charcoal sketch of her intended victim, Wilson Keeler. The first dark wizard the convocation wanted her to disabuse of life was 53 years old, a widower under suspicious circumstances, a former adept of the Order of Apollo, and a father of one Finian Keeler, 23, who still lived at home, and a daughter, Maeve Keeler, deceased at age 15.
Do they not say how she died because they don't know, or because no one thought it was fucking relevant?
Peeved, Tiffany leafed through the flotsam of other random facts about the man, assembled in slapdash fashion, as if the library of the Plundered Tomes couldn't decide what warranted inclusion. Wilson Keeler had popped up on the convocation scanners when local authorities contacted them about a series of mysterious disappearances they'd linked to the man. Basically, police solved the case, rolled up at the front door of a wizard, and collectively pissed themselves. Tiffany was the one wearing wading boots for this one. Ordering takeout sushi and beer, she settled in for an evening of studying the dossier. Keeler had worked as a trans-life healer, basically snatching the recently deceased back from just past the brink of death. Pretty noble shit, and some scientific hospitals secretly kept them on staff as a last resort. But Keeler had been a military attaché. He'd worked insurrection suppression, which, reading between the lines, meant he kept prisoners from escaping interrogations through death. Her anger boiled the more she read his official resume.
You made this monster yourselves, assholes.
It was one thing tracking down hubris-ballooned megalomaniacs with delusions of grandeur. But this poor fucker could have been a fucking humanitarian if they'd just left him the hell alone. Oh, there was no doubt that he needed to be put out of everyone's misery. But more than that, there was no need for him to have even been driven to this point. Everything was entirely fucking predictable. Of course, the resume was only for context. It hinted at skills, degree of influence with the universe, professional interests. But that wasn't going to find her a way to get into his house to rummage around for actionable evidence of whatever dark shit was going on in there. To that end, the convocation had helpfully vomited up every stray thought about the man onto the page. Keeler was a member of the one church. He liked to paint. He sent his son to a Caspian Beta-based prep school with no magic program. On Thursdays, he bowled in a local wizards league. But he'd quit without warning 8 months ago. He kept a garden of hallucinogenic plants. He enjoyed ventriloquism. His favorite color was orange for some reason. An old investment firm on Earth kept his money in diamond-rated stocks and physical precious metals, like some kind of banking dragons. His cook bought groceries that hinted at a penchant for traditional Irish cuisine. And he liked a Velmer-cut wizard robe with slitted sleeves. Tiffany dripped wasabi on the blouse the transport had supplied her.
Shit. Well, it's either laundry or free shopping in the morning.
Given that stark choice, there was really no choice at all. After a morning spent planning and an afternoon of shopping, Tiffany finally walked out of an après boutique with a bag that wouldn't have fit the leftovers from a typical American eatery. The lone woman working there had been skeptical of Tiffany's credentials, but the sigil was the sigil, and it was hard arguing with a wizard. She hated everything about her purchase, but she couldn't get past one point in her own damn plan. If you're going fishing, you need bait. Of all the useless shit her father had taught her, that little bromide from a fishing trip when she was maybe 7 or 8 had stuck with her. Worst of all, it was fucking sound advice. Continuing on her Piscine metaphor, Tiffany bought precariously tall heels at Kimiko Broward and wore them out of the store to get used to the balance. Then she stopped at Tiling for a fresh hairdo, settling on a Pacifica slash with gradient blue tint. She shopped cheap on the accessories, going for quantity over quality with bracelets, necklaces, and a lone pair of hoop earrings. She was going to call it good enough when she spotted a cybernetic accessories kiosk with a flat-vid advert loop that caught her imagination. It showed a young woman modeling color change mood contact lenses. She approached the guy working there.
How do those things work?
They read subtle biometrics like blood pressure, pulse, hormone levels, and shift to a color that matches your emotions. Creepy. But it was the perfect kind of creepy.
What do the colors mean?
You can connect your datapad and use our app to adjust to your preferences, but the defaults are straightforward. Red is angry. You get this deep cerulean for sad. Jealousy is green. Happy is...
What color is horny?
The clerk seemed briefly caught off guard. Arousal is a sort of orchid, but you have to enable those in...
Thanks, maybe another time.
Tiffany strode off, heels clacking, with a huge, mischievous grin on her face. She didn't need contact lenses. She just needed to know what the kids on Caspian Beta were doing with them. Electronic music pounded. Bass struck her chest like it was performing CPR. The heat of bodies in close proximity radiated from all directions. Fortunately for Tiffany, she wasn't wearing a whole lot. The leather miniskirt and halter from Après clung and stuck no matter how much she wriggled to try to get them to stay comfortably in place. Sweat beaded on her skin due to the lack of moisture wicking. Why didn't cows all die of heat stroke? Keeping her discomfort as far back in her mind as it would fit, Tiffany prowled Club Monaco in search of adjunct prey. Even with the heels, most of the crowd was still too tall to see over. She weaved her way through gyrating dancers and vapid laser brains too zoinked on Holly to even register her presence. Grabby hands were a mixture of errant, overly familiar, and outright opportunistic. Dealing with any of the miscreants properly was a recipe for blowing her cover. She spotted her target at the bar, flanked by a pair of women who appeared to be competing for his attention under the pretense of being friends with one another, though at a glance she doubted that Finney and Keeler knew that. And why wouldn't they compete? Finian had 3 factors going for him that jumped right out at Tiffany. First off, yowzers. He had a square-cut jaw, dimpled chin, and a body that the suit he wore wrapped like a present. Second, he oozed charm. He slouched against the bar with a self-satisfied smirk, sipping a colorful cocktail, fully at ease with the female attention aimed his way from all sides, not just the front-runners within petting distance of those pecs. Lastly, he was clearly rich. Suit, shoes, pinky ring, gold chain necklace disappearing beneath his partially unbuttoned shirt like a fishing line to reel in a catch. Tiffany really had gotten that fishing trip metaphor lodged in her brain. Shaking it off, she eased her way into competing distance down the bar from the trio.
cherry blossom highball,"
Tiffany ordered when she got the bartender's attention. She drank and made small talk with dudes who came up on her far side, all way out of their league. She tried to catch melodies in the electronica and thought something sounded like a familiar Baroque, but buried beneath the bleeps and thumps, she couldn't filter the notes from the noise to nail down. She kept her real attention on Finian. When Tiffany finally caught his eye, she resisted the urge to enter his mind and pilot him home like a wind-up toy. Instead, she just let her irises turn a vivid shade of emerald. Then she glanced away. He'd noticed. Nothing in the dossier indicated that the guy was mentally incompetent. But female attention was in plentiful supply. And if she was being honest here, her competition had a lot more obvious charms to offer a rich, gorgeous bachelor. But it was in the non-obvious department where Tiffany held all the cards. The near-side girl was drinking a pink beverage with a lime slice squeezed and discarded in the bottom of the glass.
What a shame it would be if that lime was rotten.
She couldn't watch as the girl took a sip, not even tearing her eyes off Finian to look at what she was drinking. A vivid imagination was part of a wizard's job description, and she didn't want to vicariously experience the coming gastrointestinal distress.
Oh, excuse me a minute.
When a minute turned into 10, Tiffany casually slid the girl's drink out of her way and moved a seat closer. She exchanged smiles with Finian. On the far side of him, the other woman, a brunette, was talking his ear off about her father's yacht. If Tiffany were betting, this lady had never been on a yacht, and her father was probably a big reason why she was trolling bars for rich dudes. Pretending to just have overheard, Tiffany leaned in, not coincidentally putting herself in Finian's personal space.
Oh my God, that's the blastiest! Do you have flat pics?
When the brunette cast Tiffany a glare, the look she got in return was tinged with red irises. A warning. It was the only warning the girl was going to get. This wasn't a simple night of scouting for someone whose floor she'd retrieve her clothes from tomorrow morning. Finian Keeler was a means to an end, a key to a building whose magical defenses her dossier hadn't even ventured a guess at. And if he got to be a key in a different lock along the way, that was a price Tiffany was willing to pay. She was also willing to brush some silly club girl right the fuck out of her way if she had to. But, contrary to Tiffany's self-made bet, the weirdo actually pulled a little datapad out of her purse and had pictures. Finian glanced over the slideshow as the brunette gave a running commentary. He didn't seem interested, but neither did he seem put off. The impression Tiffany got was that this was bullshit he'd put up with to bring home the prettier of his two companions. Tiffany cleared her throat. The brunette shot her a quick glare with a narrowing of the eyes so subtle that only a woman would have noticed it. The two of them made eye contact. Between blinks, the brunette experienced a vivid hallucination of being chained to an altar with Finian standing over her dressed as an Aztec priest. He loomed over her with a sacrificial dagger. Mercifully, Tiffany ended the vision before the dagger struck her in the chest. The brunette sucked in a startled breath and glanced around. She couldn't look Finian in the eye.
I actually, see you around maybe.
It was just the two of them now. What got into her? Finian wondered rhetorically as he stared until she disappeared into the crowd.
Maybe she took a pill she couldn't handle,
Tiffany suggested. She tried to make it sound like a character flaw, one she didn't share. These things are harmless fun, Finian replied. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a tiny green capsule. Pinched between thumb and forefinger, there was no telling what it contained. Didn't matter. Leaning toward him, she plucked the capsule from him with her lips. It vanished into nothingness, and she swallowed for show.
So am I.
They locked gazes. Tiffany turned her irises a vivid shade of pinkish purple. 10 minutes later, they were making out in the back of a hover taxi on the way to his place. Tiffany was going to enjoy being a librarian. Finian took her by the hand as they entered the house through the front doors. He didn't say why, but Tiffany felt the faint pressure, like being drawn through a soap bubble. Without physical contact with his son, Tiffany wouldn't have gotten into Wilson Keeler's home without having to break something. The house wasn't on par with Esper and Karen's new digs, but for midcore, it was reasonably swanky. English manor architecture, decorated with a Teutonic flair. Either someone had a muddied family tree, or this was mere personal taste. Whichever it was, Tiffany only allowed herself a cursory glance until she managed to separate from her escort. Finian's room was on the upper floor. He lived like this was an upper-class boarding school and treated the bedroom accordingly. Drug paraphernalia and discarded sports equipment lay haphazardly about. Legitimate nude artwork on the walls appeared crass by context. But the bed was huge and soft. Finian was huge and hard. He had abs like an upturned muffin tin and the stamina of a long-distance runner. For a time, when her brain was thinking anything at all, Tiffany wondered whether they'd be getting breakfast before she had a chance to sneak away. Eventually, he fell asleep. Tiffany lay there beside him, allowing her sweat to cool. When she climbed quietly out of bed, she was unsteady on her feet. She felt around in the dark until she managed to collect her scattered clothing from where Finian had flung it all. As she struggled back into the leather outfit, she kept her cursing silent. The heels she carried until she was out in the hallway. Turning back to regard the door, she remembered what lay beyond.
Fuck me.
Given her plans for the remainder of the night, she didn't think it would work out, but she'd have loved to pack up a slice of that to take home. She silenced the clack of her shoes. Back on mission, a little squirt of adrenaline into her veins kept her alert. After a few wobbly steps, she reclaimed her proper balance. The Keeler house was deathly quiet. Everything in the dossier suggested that Wilson Keeler only left rarely and pretty much never slept anywhere else. He had to be around here somewhere. If she also solved the mystery of the police's missing persons cases, all the better. But she was here for just two things: write the last chapter of the Wilson Keeler biography and collect his own literature for the library of the Plundered Tomes. A master bedroom had its door left open wide enough for her to tell it was unoccupied. If Keeler kept any of his notes or diaries in there, she could uncover them later. She needed a corpse before she felt comfortable looting and plundering. Tiffany paused mid-stride. Damn, that was a fucked-up thought. She supposed she'd better get used to that one and its ilk. For better or worse, the convocation was entrusting her with what in any mob hollow would have been a hit woman's role. Weirdly, they'd send word to local police so they wouldn't waste time investigating a matter that the convocation considered handled. This was all disconcertingly official, despite prowling through a rich guy's house in the dead of night in soiled clubwear after sleeping with his son. A few times. Actually, she'd lost count. She could go back into her memories later, and she was definitely going to, and check. For now, she had more important things on her mind. Exploring a mansion wasn't really a matter of thoroughness. This place was good-sized, but there just wasn't enough physical volume to conceal whole extra rooms, and stretching space to make a secret lair or laboratory fit into a closet or pantry would have required magic she felt confident she'd notice. Since the upper floor was clear, that left the basement. Tiffany stopped only briefly in the kitchen to chug a bottle of orange juice and down half a box of crackers meant to be eaten with fancy cheeses. Refueled and replenished, she easily located a door that led down to a wine cellar. Classy, but useless. Unwilling to give up so easily, she studied the floors until she noticed a faintly worn path that led to nowhere.
You cheap hack, Keeler!
It didn't take long to fumble open a secret door triggered by tugging on the lone bottle of wine without a sheen of dust on it. Whisper quiet, the door swung to reveal a downward staircase. It looked straight out of a mid-budget medieval hollow. If wizards were ever consulted on those sorts of projects, she supposed she owed the holomakers retroactive credit for authenticity. A twinge of disappointment accompanied the realization that real wizards were that cliched and hokey. Tiffany crept downward, teetering on her high heels, wondering whether it was worth the trouble at this point to sit on the stairs and remove them. But somehow, tiptoeing barefoot into a dark wizard's lair felt unwise. Like step-in goo that would haunt her forever type unwise. Down, down she went, until the faint sound of humming wafted up the stairway to her ears. Bach? She was shit with classical music, but it was some composer or another. As she got nearer, something else wafted, and she covered her nose and mouth with a hand. The smell wasn't rotting death, which was a plus, she supposed, but rather a chemical odor reminiscent of a high school biology class. Not that she'd attended a lot of high school, but the odor had left an impression. When she reached the bottom of the stairway, she was looking onto the set of a cheesy horror hollow. A central collection of tables housed multitudes of books, loose pages, inkpots, quills, flasks, beakers, candles, all surrounding a single swiveling wing-back chair on wheels. The high back of the chair blocked Tiffany's view of the humming occupant, whose shoes were visible below. But what really drew Tiffany's horrified attention were the 6 medical tables around the room's perimeter. Silvery steel and slightly inclined, each supported a single patient. Tiffany went with patient instead of body because she could see the chests of the naked bodies, 3 male, 3 female, slowly rising and falling. But otherwise, the 6 were totally motionless. Their eyes stared blankly, showing all whites. As Tiffany took in the scene, trying to puzzle out what the ever-fucking hell was going on down here, the chair swung around. Wilson Keeler reached a quill across an open book in his lap toward an inkpot on a table that had been behind him a moment ago. "Hello," he told her in mild surprise. "Wandered off a bit?" Tiffany gulped.
Looking for the loo.
You passed at least 3 washrooms to get here.
None looked like a guest washroom,
Tiffany explained with a bashful smile.
Interesting place Is this a private hospital or something?
He beckoned her closer.
Come, have a look for yourself.
Nothing to worry about here, the spider told the fly. This guy must have had a real low opinion of the type of bedmates his son took home. But he wasn't wrong either. Barring Tiffany's intervention, Finian would have been asleep, pillowed between a pair of Cosmo-inflated boobs. Since she was interested to know what she was going to be cataloging shortly, she decided to play along. Tiffany inched forward, hands clutched in front of her to avoid even accidentally touching anything.
Are they...
Perfectly fine,
Keeler assured her with smarmy condescension. He set aside his open logbook and gave her a tour.
Each of them was dying,
but I've kept them alive. Dying of what? Life, Keeler replied flippantly. It's always terminal. I've slowed their bodies, all but ground their mortal decay to a halt. Here. He took Tiffany by the wrist and placed her hand on the chest of one of the women. The flesh was cool to the touch. Wait for it. Wait. There. Tiffany felt a single heartbeat. So the missing persons cases were kidnappings, not murders. Nice to know. You feel that? Life. I feed them weekly. I've nearly solved the problem of them soiling themselves. Within the next few years, I hope to preserve them in a waking state. Years? Tiffany echoed. Small price to pay for immortality, don't you think? Keeler's other hand brushed along Tiffany's jawline, and she knew where this was going. He turned her to face him. I'll add a table for you, of course. He looked her in the eye, and that was Tiffany's cue to end the charade. She entered his mind, intent on rendering him impotent prior to execution. But Keeler's mind wasn't keen to be tied to a burning stake just yet. Tiffany found herself back in her own mind instantly. Wilson Keeler crumpled to the floor like someone had cut the strings holding him up. Jesus! She prodded him with the stiletto heel, drawing not so much as a flinch. Cowardly fucker! I'm still telling them I killed you. Just in case, she put the heel on Keeler's windpipe and let her weight crush it. A hand grabbed Tiffany's wrist. A new voice told her, That wasn't nice. Tiffany screamed. She wasn't proud of that, but the sound startled her captor and allowed her to yank her hand free. On the table just beside her, the comatose woman's eyes rolled back down and she sat up. A weight of willpower bore down, attempting to smother Tiffany's magic. Leaping from the table, the naked kidnapping victim grabbed for Tiffany's throat. Luckily, Tiffany didn't panic easily. She flung out a hand toward her attacker. The blow didn't need to physically connect. The open-fisted strike still flung the puppet against the wall. It hit with a crack and flopped to the floor. On the far side of the laboratory, a nude man blinked and his previously vacant eyes filled with hatred. "Who in the blazes are you?" he demanded, climbing off the medical table and lurching for the table of magical accoutrements. "You're too young for an inquisitor. Who are my sleepers to you?" Tiffany flipped the table between them, turning the pages to oversized confetti, landing books open face down and shattering elixirs, ointments, and an egg salad sandwich Keeler had been halfway through eating as a midnight snack. Whatever it was he'd been seeking there, he wasn't getting it. "Leave that body, and I'll make oblivion painless." Tiffany stalked toward him, trying to keep this from turning into a brawl that might cost another helpless innocent their life. In keeping a hawk-like watch on the body in case of a sudden attack, she happened to glance down at the crotch. "Come on, seriously?" "I make no apology for simple biology. If I have to go in there and dig you out, I will." When Keeler only backed away toward the wall, clearly at a loss for options, she sprang. Keeler kept the eyes of his host body squeezed shut. Despite being larger and more muscular, Tiffany quickly wrestled him to the ground and pried open one eye. Yet again, the instant she entered that mind, it collapsed around her. "Fuck!" She scanned the remaining 4 bodies, slapping faces and twisting things that should have hurt. There was no chance he was done this easily, but she couldn't tell which he was hidden inside. Grimacing in distaste, she manually rolled the eyes of one back down and looked into them. Nothing. Vacant. There was no mind left.
Whatever was in these skulls, it was no longer a viable human mind.
Shit.
Then where had Keeler gone? The answer was at once both obvious and sickened her to the core. Racing up the stairs, Tiffany slipped twice, eventually just abandoning the heels and slapping up the steps barefoot. She reached the main floor just in time to catch Finian Keeler, half-dressed and lugging a duffel bag with whatever he planned to escape with. He was haggard and panicked. When he spotted her, he burst into a sprint for the front door. The willpower that sought to quell Tiffany's magic paled in comparison to her own. With a clenching of her fist, Keeler's ankles pulled together. A quick tug, and he slammed face first to the floor, but the duffel partially cushioned his fall. Discarding the luggage, he pedaled against the floor for purchase, fruitlessly, as Tiffany reeled him in.
Please, I'll make it up to you. Whatever I did to you, I can grant you immortality.
Tiffany glowered down at the pathetic hermit crab groveling at her feet.
You were right about me not being an inquisitor.
I've got money.
I've got unlimited credit thanks to the library of the Plundered Tomes.
Keeler gave up trying to bargain. He whimpered, knowing he was doomed.
Fuck's sake. At least give your son the body back.
Keeler shook his head.
Spare me. Promise me.
This was her choice. There was no court, no judge, no jury of this shitbag's peers, just her. There was no mechanism in place for oversight. Mordecai the Brown himself had explained how this job worked, and there hadn't been so much as a regime change since his knowledge was firsthand. She had the body of Wilson Keeler in the basement, all the man's research, and a plausible tale for Azrael about how all this went down.
Your son's not even in there, is he?
Keeler's only response was sobbing. Tiffany did the galaxy the favor. Keeler's tiny mercy was that he was too pitiful to draw out his death. Alone now in the house, Tiffany turned to the half of her job for which she'd received zero training and preparation, cataloging Keeler's research. She stood in a pair of women's flats a size too large for her, discovered in a disquieting cache of personal effects presumably belonging to Keeler's victims. All around her, chaos and carnage. And 4 semi-living bodies. First things first. She put an end to the mindless abominations, smothering them one by one. She ignored the lump in her throat as she recalled that these were people that Caspian Beta's police had files on. There were families for each. Families she firmly believed were better off never knowing what happened here. Tiffany promised to make up something more comforting to pass along to the authorities. She still needed to decide what to bring back with her.
What a goddamn mess. I wonder if that shuttle pilot's ever done janitorial work.
Mere hours later, after a purpley deep trip through the astral, Tiffany arrived at the Convocation Library shortly after it opened to the public for the day. All eyes turned her way as she strode through on her first day officially at work, clad in a men's flannel shirt 4 sizes too large for her, covering a leather ensemble that left her legs bare to mid-thigh, plus a pair of white flats that threatened to fall off her feet with each step. But possibly more than her attire, her collection of plundered research drew the attention of librarians and patrons alike. 2 liaisons followed her in, bearing a grav sled piled with books and paperwork. A junior librarian relieved them and levitated the contents for them. He fell into step behind Tiffany as she headed for the stairwell to the vault of the Plundered Tomes. Even more than the outfit and motherlode of literature, The oversized, blood-stained duffel bag drew ghoulish curiosity. Tiffany saw no reason to answer any questions about her haul as she made her way down to see Azrael. The guardian of the Plundered Tomes was at his desk when she arrived, poring over what appeared at a glance to be mundane paperwork. "Back so soon?" Tiffany dropped the duffel on his desk. It landed with a macabre rattle.
Nice warm-up. Guy was a total weenie. Oh, and you might want to reopen the case of his father's suicide. Yeah, there's a few notes in there that predate this guy's lifetime. The handwriting changes, but looks oddly similar.
Azrael ignored her, choosing to focus on the duffel.
What, beneath Merlin's all-concealing robes, is this?
Obligingly, Tiffany unzipped the bag.
Yeah, about that. I know we're not big into proof of death, but hear me out.
She pulled out a skull.
See here? He etched runes into the bone, then healed over the scars. Just the skulls. I cremated the rest of them. 8 in all, including the fucker's own son.
You killed them all? Azrael asked.
Well, I think technically there was only one life between these 8 bodies. You know, like the gray hags who shared one eye and one tooth, except this was one mind. Near as I can tell, he used a few Morphean techniques, but mostly relied on his Apollonian training.
Fine. Catalog the heads for study. Just get that thing out of here,
Azrael said with distaste, fluttering his fingers toward the duffel occupying much of his desk. Tiffany gave the duffel an appraising look.
What? Just a little blood? I got most of it off on the shuttle ride. Fine. You know, whatever. I'm keeping it. I'll be doing a lot of traveling, right? Perfect luggage. Roll it up when it's empty, stuff it into any place. Strap's pretty comfy to carry. You should recommend them to the other librarians.
Azrael's face showed no emotion.
The other librarians don't make a habit of bringing me severed heads. Don't you make a habit of it either.
Tiffany shrugged.
You got it, boss. I'll drop these remains off and head home to change into something appropriate for my orientation.
With a single solemn nod, Azrael dismissed her. For some reason, she didn't expect he really cared what she wore. The guy was a stone.
Very well.
Just as she hefted the duffel and turned to leave, one parting thought occurred to her.
Oh, and can you approve a week's vacation for a liaison pilot named Brian Ellis? That poor fucker earned it.
Thanks for listening to this Black Ocean adventure. This mission may be over, but there's plenty more for you to enjoy. For more magical mischief in the 26th century, search Black Ocean on your favorite audiobook store or visit blackoceanmissions.com.